Chapter 32 is fascinating, really continuing on the same theme that's been set from chapter 29 and chapter 30, calling Israel to call out to God for deliverance. And so he's continuing to describe their deliverance and say, call out to this God who is your sure cornerstone, your rock, because these promises are applicable. And they're, as they were applicable to Isaiah's generation, they're even more so applicable to that generation they were written for at the end of the age, which we can apply to today. So here we go. Chapter 32, he describes the Messiah reigning in righteousness. And what Isaiah is going to do in this chapter is actually contrast a few different styles of leadership, or he's going to describe the characteristics of different leaders at the end of the age. And so here is the leadership of the Messiah who reigns with righteousness, and his princes rule with justice. It's not just the Messiah himself, but it's actually his people to whom he's delegated authority. Each of these princes to whom he's delegated authority will be like a hiding place from the wind and a shelter from the storm, like streams of water in a dry place, like the shade of a great rock in a weary land. So Isaiah is using kind of Hebrew figures of speech to describe kind of what their leadership is like. But each prince accurately reflects the character and the authority of their king, the king who's reigning in righteousness. His princes are ruling like him. These are aspirations of any follower of the Messiah, and they will absolutely characterize those with delegated authority in the Messianic age. So readers should also consider the implied need for hiding, shelter, water, and shade. He's saying if these leaders are going to be like this, well, there's going to be need of those kind of leaders. And while these are Hebrew figures of speech that may just generally describe the goodness, the benefits of their leadership and their authority, they may also point to the role of Messianic followers during the storm and tribulation when that need is really probably most dire. So imagine covenant loyalists during the tribulation who are acting in the authority of the Messiah as prophetic witnesses, and their leadership becomes like a shelter, a hiding place from the wind and shelter from the storm of the tribulation. Like that's, I don't know. That might be too much nuance, but it's not to say that these are not aspirations of every follower of Messiah today. We all ought to reflect his leadership in this way that people would say of us, as they would say of our Messiah. Each will be like a hiding place from the wind and shelter from a storm. Imagine that being said, not just of your church, but of your business or your local government or your local school, or whatever role you have. These characteristics ought to be evident as we reflect the leadership of our Messiah. All right, and here's the benefits. Here are the results, the outcomes that those leaders produce. Then the eyes of those who see will not be closed, and the ears of those who hear will give attention. Again, it's that reversal of that spiritual blindness and deafness in chapter 29, which we just looked at. Their eyes are going to be opened, their ears are going to hear and give attention to the word of the Lord. The heart of the hasty will understand and know. It's the same thing we looked at in chapter 29. You might say, those who were impulsive or acted rashly or overreactive, and those who were perplexed and confused and almost frozen in fear, gain clarity. They actually restore clarity and speak distinctly, And the fool will no longer be called noble, and the scoundrel will not be said to be honorable. There's the common understanding of morality derived from absolute truth is restored. The wrong things are going to be made right, and God's going to turn things right way back up. And then he goes on to describe these three leadership characteristics. The foolish leaders of that generation, they speak folly, and their heart is busy with iniquity. You've got the scoundrel himself, which I've taken to be a figure of speech for kind of the chief scoundrel, which would be the Antichrist. In Isaiah's generation, it could be Sennacherib. Some people have said in Isaiah's generation, it could be the head of Israel, the ones who are brokering these terrible deals and making this covenant with death. But there's been other places in Isaiah where the scoundrel likely refers to the Antichrist. So I think you've got the foolish leaders, the fool speaks folly, the scoundrel being the Antichrist. His devices are evil. He plans wicked schemes to ruin the poor with lying words. Sounds very reminiscent of other descriptions of the Antichrist. But he who is noble plans noble things, and on noble things he stands. So you got those three: the foolish leaders, the Antichrist, and the Messiah, he who is noble, who plans noble things. The interesting thing about that word for noble, the Messiah's plans are founded on generosity toward the poor. That word for nobility often means a readiness to be generous. And that's really cool. Of course, that would be noble, but it is the reversal of what this other leadership is trying to exploit. All the exploitation of this leadership is so opposite of the Messiah. No, he's the opposite of that exploitation. He's noble, he's generous, he's balanced, he's fair, he's just, all those things. Now, starting in verse 9, Isaiah addresses this call where he confronts those who have tacitly complied and even benefited from the exploited practices of the rebellion. In this case, Isaiah specifically calls out the attitude of complacent women as reflections of the systemic corruption. Isaiah calls the women to recognize the urgency of the hour and mourn the covenant disloyalty of the people and begin to cry out to God. And you can see a bit of that there, saying, put on sackcloth around your waist and cry out. I mean, go into mourning, because the palace is forsaken and the populous city is deserted. The hill and the watchtower have become dens forever. It's saying there's this disaster coming upon you until the Spirit is poured out upon us from on high. He's saying, until the Lord hears the sound of your cry. He's waiting to be gracious to us until he hears the sound of our cry. And that is when his Spirit will be poured out. That's what he just described in chapter 30. Now, interestingly, chapter 15 is verse 15 is very reminiscent of Joel chapter 2, verse 28, which talks about the Lord will pour out his Spirit on all flesh. It's very, very interesting parallel. And it's uncertain whether Isaiah is describing Joel chapter 2, and maybe he's referencing Joel 2, or if Joel is referencing Isaiah. It kind of depends on when you date the book of Joel. Now, in this case, I am putting Isaiah as independent, and that Joel is later referencing, Joel could be later referencing Isaiah, because I'm kind of dating Joel a little bit later, and I'm going to explain why when I get to the book of Joel. But I hold that loosely. Isaiah could be describing what Joel wrote, because Joel could have been written earlier, or it could be the other way. But either way, it doesn't matter. They're talking about the same thing, and whether one is referencing the other, it doesn't matter. But it's that same promise. Really, I think what Isaiah is referencing is chapter 30, his message that he's continuing here. And the wilderness will become a fruitful field, and the fruitful field will be a forest. He's saying all this desolate places, what's been made desolate by the discipline of the Lord, is going to be restored back into a forest, the land of Israel. It's beautiful. Then justice will dwell in the wilderness, and righteousness will abide in the fruitful field, and the effects of righteousness will be peace, and the resulting righteousness, quietness, and trust, and the result of righteousness, quietness, and trust forever. And I love this, verse 17, the effect of righteousness will be shalom. That's why we've called this study Seeking Shalom, because the effect of your return, when the Lord pours out his Spirit, it is to accomplish shalom. It's awesome. That's what that word for peace actually means. And that's why we call this study Seeking Shalom. My people will abide in a peaceful habitation, in secure dwellings, and in quiet resting places. They're just dwelling securely in the land. This is a common kind of covenant blessing that even Moses described. And then you have this little phrase here at the end, and it will hail when the forest falls down and the cities will be utterly laid low. And he's saying, even though it's going to be poorly with the wicked, it's going to go badly for them, it's going to go well with you. And happy will you be who sow beside all waters, and who feed your ox and the donkey on the range free. Basically saying you've got this abundant prosperity. It's going to be terrible forest falling for the wicked, but awesome restoration for the righteous.